Hello, English 204 students. This is Dr. Erin Williams. I am coming to you with this week's brief lecture. We won't have brief lectures each week, but this one we need it for. There aren't a lot of good explanations about rhetoric and genre that you can get in 15 minutes, but that's what I'm going to give you here today. It might even be fewer than 15 minutes. We'll see. So by now I'm assuming that you have read chapter 1 of the Easy Writer and that you hopefully have a copy of the genre analysis handout that I've posted to Blackboard. If you don't have that handout nearby, I suggest pausing this video lecture and going to find it. Okay, so let's start out with defining rhetoric. There's this classical definition of rhetoric. It comes to us from Aristotle. It's sort of considered to be the basic definition. And that is roughly that rhetoric is the art of knowing the available means of persuasion in any given situation. Now, this is fine enough, but notice that it focuses on persuasion. There are more contemporary definitions of rhetoric, and in my discipline, which is rhetoric composition, we go beyond just persuasion. After all, there's lots of different purposes for communicating or sharing information. Some of it's just to share information or to be informative. Sometimes it's to entertain. Sometimes it is to persuade. Sometimes it's to get an emotional reaction. And there are lots of different reasons why we communicate and lots of different reasons that we need our communication to be effective. And for that reason, contemporary definitions of rhetoric focus on language in use and its effects. What effects are we trying to have by using language? So that's why I chose this picture. I think it's a good example of how we use language to inform, to persuade, and actually how we use language in ways that just suggest things, maybe that we didn't want to be suggested, that reveal something about the context in which that language is used. I mean, notice the wanted sign at the top. That certainly reflects the context in which that text is used, the historical and the social context. So anyway, that's what contemporary rhetoric studies is interested in. So rhetoric, as I'm going to use it, isn't quite like you hear about it on TV. You hear politicians say, well, my opponent's rhetoric is misleading. Yeah. In rhetoric composition, the academic discipline, we're interested in studying how text and context mutually inform one another. Alright, so genre is part of all of that. In order to understand that, though, we gotta understand what is and isn't genre, because I'm going to talk about it slightly differently than you've probably heard about it before. So for people who are in my field, when we use the term genre, we don't mean just a classification system that's used by bookstores and movie theaters. We're not talking about the romance section versus the comedy section. For us, we're talking about something more like patterns of texts, types of communication that you can label. That's my easy test. How do you know you've got a genre? Alright, well, I could say it's a pattern of texts and text use. Texts used in contexts. Alright, well, that's great, But here's my, quick and dirty way to know when I've got a genre. Do I have a type of communication that I can label? That would be almost anything. A joke, a greeting, a grocery list, any kind of communication that I can label. Now, how does that rule work? Well, because if I can label that kind of communication, if I can use a label, a pre-existing label, accurately to describe a certain kind of communication, that means it's got a pattern that's well enough established in its social context that we all are pretty familiar with it. So if I say that I've got my grocery list ready and I get out a book and open it to the center, you will be surprised, won't you? Right. Because that label wouldn't apply to that kind of text. It would break the pattern, right? Yeah, that's kind of an extreme example, but we'll get into more practical examples here in a moment. Now, and this last bullet point I have here, what isn't a genre? It's easy to get the type or the pattern of communication confused with the instrument or the medium used to create or communicate the genre. So, for example, when you think of instrument, you might think of, say, a musical instrument like a cello. Alright, but that's not a genre. That's a type of instrument, but it's not a type of patterned communication. Alright, well, let's say I'm going to play some music. Right, well, paper is the medium on which I find that music. I've used the cello to play the music, but the paper is not the genre. It's not the pattern of communication. It's the thing the communication is communicated on, so it's the medium. Right, and so here's an example of a genre associated with that instrument and medium, a symphony, or a concerto, things like that. Another common example, the pencil is the instrument. It's a type of instrument, but it's not a type of communication. It helps me write my grocery list. And nowadays, you'd use your finger on a tablet. I'm assuming that's what you people have. I'm old. I have my old PC. No tablets for me, thanks. But in that example, you'd have your finger, you'd have your tablet as the medium of communication, or the way your communication gets shared, and maybe what you're writing, the kind of label you could use for that kind of communication, is an email. Alright, so those are just some brief examples. Don't worry, you're not really being tested on what is a genre in this class. But I want you to be able to identify the parts of a genre, parts of patterns of texts, and understand how they work to make the text work, to make the communication happen, and to help participants in the context communicate whatever they need to communicate or achieve whatever goal they want to achieve. I'm hoping that increasing your genre awareness will help you be a more sensitive and flexible writer. So that's what we're headed toward. So let's look at some of those parts of genres or aspects of genres that I want you to be familiar with. This is on the handout too. Alright, so what are some of the common rhetorical features of genres? Some easy ways to describe almost any kind of text. I've broken this down into text features and context features. So the text features focus on what's actually there in writing. The context features focus on the social context in which the writing is used. Remember, we're talking about the effectiveness of language in use from this rhetorical perspective. And so that's how we're looking at genre, not just as writing on a piece of paper or on a screen, but writing used by people in their socio-historical settings, and we gotta understand why they would use that kind of communication. Alright, so I'm going to assume that at the 200 level, you guys are capable of reading this list and understanding the basics here. I'm going to run through an example with you, so you might want to pause here and review this list. My example is going to be of syllabi, a genre with which I am well familiar, and I'm going to assume that you're pretty familiar with it too. So, let's take a look at the handout first. This is our genre and rhetoric handout. This is what you'll find on Blackboard, and down at the very bottom you can see the genre analysis table. I've just put it into a different document, and I've already started filling out some of the things you might observe if you looked at many exemplar syllabi. That's the first thing I would do if I'm going to do a genre analysis. I would gather many samples of the genre that I'm interested in. In this case, like I said, I've seen a whole bunch of syllabi. I bet you have too, and I'm being very sloppy in my research by not taking the time to find many sample syllabi. Do not try this at home. I expect you guys to actually find samples of the genre you're going to analyze, but that's not our focus right now. Right now it's just making sure that some of the categories of genre analysis make sense to you, some of the rhetorical features. So you can see some of what I've got listed out here. This is a very, very brief list of features, and it's really just there to make to give you guys an example. You can pause here and read over some of the things that I've written there if you like. Note that I've got visual things listed in format. I've got syntactic or sentence structure and length issues in syntax. Organization is missing the middle section because this is what happens when you're lazy with your research. I don't want to write down what the typical genre organization is because I wonder what I would find if I looked at many sample syllabi. Would I see something interesting in terms of what happens between the title of the course and the course schedule? I don't know. So I had just about gotten to the end of text features. I thought I would make sure to clarify that diction just means word choice. Now, where the chapter you read from the Easy Writer, they focus on tone, and tone is often made possible through diction. So your word choice can set the tone. You might want to add another rhetorical feature category here. I don't see any reason why you couldn't add in tone or stance or any of the other things that you read about in chapter 1. It's just a matter of identifying those features. So, for example, let's say, I'm going to put my microphone down a little bit. Let's say that instead of diction, I want tone, or perhaps I want it in addition, but I'm just not going to take the time to add in another one, you see. So if I had tone here, what's the typical tone of a syllabus? Formal, but can also reveal personality of the instructor using more friendly words. Let's come out here to context. Context is really interesting, right? Here's the typical audience of a syllabus. I might have to do some asking around to find out information if I don't know enough about the syllabus. I might ask somebody who actually writes the syllabus, and I might find out that yes, it's primarily students, but it's also the instructor's mentors and bosses. So for me, that's my department chair and my deans. Who writes them? Instructors of the courses, of course. What situations are they used in? Now that's pretty detailed. I could put a lot down here. That could be anything from a student trying to look up grade information to somebody trying to decide if they want to take the course to a teacher trying to share information with the student. There are many, many different kinds of situations in which syllabi are used. Is it a highly valued genre? Probably not. In some cases it is, in some cases it's not. If it's the thing that you're going to use to try and help you appeal a grade, you probably value it highly. But is it the most important thing for your education in the course? No, the textbook probably is. And purpose. What's the purpose of the syllabus? It's to communicate information about the course so that it will go smoothly. It's also kind of a legal document. It's also a way of having the instructor be clear about his or her expectations and intentions. So that's just an example of some of the things I could use to fill in these blanks. Just for the sake of time, I'm not typing them in. So I've only got a few seconds left here. I will say thank you very much for your attention. The next step after this would be to consider the significance of the genre. What is it that this type of text does in the world? What does it allow its users to do? You'll want to be thinking about that as you begin to research wikis and a genre related to nursing.